everyone, I'm Ceira, a pet and animal portrait artist, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to draw noses such as this one, especially where your reference photo isn't very good. So let's get on with the tutorial. So first I like to start with lightening my sketch, which if you'd like to follow on with this tutorial, just make sure you've got your sketch done before you start. But I like to lighten my sketch with the Faber-Castell kneadable eraser, but if you have any other one that works fine too. Or the Tombow mono eraser if the sketch is being more stubborn. Next, I like to plot in my darkest areas with the dark sepia by the Faber-Castell Polychromos range, and usually the darkest bit on the nose is the nostrils, so I'll just go in and start plotting where the darkest area is, either using little lines if I want finer definition or little circles if I'm doing areas of shading. Another thing which can be really useful during these earlier stages, especially when you've got a poor reference photo, is to turn the exposure and the shadows up. That way you can kind of see the underlying colours of things and you'll be able to plot them out. But don't leave it like this for the whole drawing, as you do still want to add the contrast later on. Also pay attention to the pressure you're using. Here I'm using very, very light pressure. I believe this is essential in the earlier parts of your drawing so that your paper tooth isn't filled and you still have lots of potential to darken later on. Still using the dark sepia in the Polychromos range, you just saw I like to fill in the little indentation in the middle and then continue back on the nostrils, just so I kind of can map out where everything is. Now next I'm going to grab the same brand Faber-Castell Polychromos, but in a different colour, the dark indigo. Now I really like this colour. It's like a dark blue sort of colour if you're using anything other than the Polychromos range, and it's really good for adding in like cooler tones and also giving more depth to the black that's going to be added later on. And the thing you saw me doing with my pencil just now is a technique that I learned when I first started drawing. This technique is where the bottom of the eyes, the top of the eyes, the top of the nose, the top of the nostrils and the bottom of the nostrils should all be in line. If you move your pencil up against them, they should all be at the same angle, and this is really, really important in getting your proportions right to make sure that the drawing doesn't look off. Now this nostril's a bit weird. It's got a highlight in the nostril, so I'm just sketching underneath that to make sure I can still have my proportions correct, and then I'm going to go back in with my Tombow mono eraser to clean everything up. At the beginning it is best to take your time, as this is the time when you need to focus and just make sure that everything is in proportion and then you've got everything properly done. Now I'm going in with my black Polychromos to the really, really dark areas in the nostril to try and start off getting them darkened for a bit of contrast. And this is really, really important that you do this, as otherwise the drawing will be too flat and it won't be realistic. So while I'm doing this, I'd just like to talk to you guys about something really important when it comes to drawing realistic animals, which we will get to later on and you will see me doing it. So even in places like the nose, it's really important that you look for those colours. The colours is what's going to bring the drawing to life. So in the nose, I see lots of purples, pinks, blues, and you're going to want to add those all in. It might seem a bit strange to be adding purple into a nose when the nose doesn't really look purple, but it's kind of like the underlayer of it, and it will help provide a good base for you to work on later so that the drawing doesn't look flat. What you can see me doing here is using my dark sepia polychroma again to go in and on the actual nose put in some little circles to help resemble the nose texture in the darkest areas. I can see sort of a brown tinge, so I'm just going and adding them in, and it's giving me some structure to work off, and then I'll build from there with all the different colours and all the different layers. And then I like to repeat the same thing with the Polychromos dark indigo and add some blue into there, which also is helping add to those colours. The thing about using the light layers is that you can use your kneadable eraser, like I have done here, if you need to go and take some of the pigment out because you added too much. And I'm going to continue using the dark indigo and the dark sepia to just add darkness wherever I see it, and I still like to work really, really slowly at this point because it allows me to not rush into things and get things right where I want them to be. Now, if you don't have the Polychromos dark sepia, it is a dark grey, but it's a very brown grey. It's not like a warm grey. It's like a brown warm grey, if that makes sense. So if you don't have that pencil, an alternative that matches that description would also work. I decided for this tutorial that as to not bore you all, I would speed it up, so the clip is in 2 times speed. As you can tell, I am a very slow drawer, but if you can't keep up, that's fine, as I am working in 2 times speed. Also, this tutorial isn't necessarily just for this nose, it is just advice for anyone trying to draw a nose that has got a very poor reference photo and also sort of has this pink tinge to it. So the next step is to pick up the dark sepia again and go back into the nostrils, and now you're going to start adding to the mid-tones in the nostrils. They're a lot darker than the rest of the nose most of the time, but you just want to start adding some more values into there because right now you've only got the darkest areas done, so it's important that you get some more shadows added in to get the 3D look. Another thing I recommend, which won't be anything new to people who've been drawing for quite a long time, is having something under your hand in between you and the drawing. That way when you get onto the later stages of the drawing, you're not going to smudge anything. And this is really, really important, especially if you're using graphite as well, because graphite really smudges. But thankfully, coloured pencils aren't as bad, but it's still a good idea to have a piece of paper under your hand. So you're just going to keep layering these 2 pencils that we've already been using, the dark sepia and the dark indigo, and remembering to do them in the small circles but not too small, so we still have the texture on the nose. Now I'm just reaching for my black polychromos again, as I like to darken the nostrils gradually over a lot of time just so I can ensure I'm getting loads of depth in the drawing. So now I'm going to move back over to the nostril that has the strange highlight in it, and I'm going to focus on really darkening that bit up the top. As you can see in the reference photo, that bit there is really dark, so I just want to focus all the pigment on that area so that we get the right amount of contrast. And you don't want to worry too much at the moment about how the drawing is looking. It's going to look a bit odd, it's going to look like it's in its ugly stages, and that's because it is when you first start out. But also, you don't have any of the fur plotted around the nose. If you work like me, I like to draw the nose and then plot in the fur around it. And sometimes if you don't have that context, it can look a bit odd, so you just need to bear with it. Now you're just going to add even more to the mid-tones in the nostrils and just darken those up because currently they're a lot lighter than what they actually are in the picture. And also darkening up the middle section of the nose will really help too, and you're going to be using your dark sepia and your black for this. As well as doing this, now is also the time to start plotting in the mid layers on your actual nose, not just in the nostrils. I like to use the dark sepia for this, and I do lighter pressure, the lightest that we've used so far, and just add little circles to some of the darkest mid-tones that there are on the nose. And if you're unsure about the proportions during this time, it is key to make sure that the proportions are correct using the pencil method. I was pretty happy with my proportions, but sometimes your mind can accidentally change them by adding more black or not as much black as you need to. So if you're not confident with this, I really suggest that you definitely know that you've got them right by using the pencil method. Now for a nose that has a pink tinge to it, I like to take the cinnamon polychromos and I like to just buff little circles into the paper, really light pressure at this time to start bringing in where the pink hue is going to be. For anyone that doesn't have this pencil, it is like a pinky, but it's a very warm pink, it's not a very bright pink, so I hope that can help some of you. And over top of this, I'm going to keep on layering the dark sepia to create the transition from where the brown is to where the pink is. Also, make sure to maintain the little circles all throughout this process, as on the nose, the texture really is the key. You don't want to be doing lines, as that is what you use for the fur, and that will create fur texture. You want to be using little circles to create the texture that's on the nose. So now swap back from the dark sepia and go back to the dark indigo and darken up the nostrils even more. Like I said, it's a very gradual process, but you want to have all of those layers in there to make sure that the black doesn't end up flat at the end. It will provide it with depth. So next, after I finish using the dark indigo on the rest of the nose, adding it where I'd like, I'm going to take the Warm Grey 5, also by the Polychromos range, and I'm going to start smoothing out those really dark areas, and then I'm also going to start adding it to the midtones that you see, like on the right hand side of the nose, there's the dark bit, but there's also a bit above it that's in an oval shape. So you're going to be adding things like that in with the Warm Grey 5, but you're going to be using really light pressure because you don't want to make it too dark just yet. Warm Grey 5 by the Polychromos is a great colour to start doing this with, as it really works for these noses. And go back in with your black in the nostrils and make sure you have those darks really dark and crisp. After you've done this, keep working the black into the nostrils, but now you're going to start using little circles to drag it out into the darker midtones that I told you about earlier. So in reality, these darker midtones are still almost just as dark as the rest of the nostril. It's just really good to help you in the beginning by splitting them up. So you're just going to darken these now with the black. When you're working from poor reference photos, it's really important that you take your time with this step, as you don't want to rush into it too much and get the proportions and everything wrong. After darkening the nose with the dark indigo a bit more, I'm just going to take the Warm Grey 5 and start building up those dark areas and the midtones in between them even more. The photo I was using at this point still was on the very high exposure and also the high shadows, so that I could really see what was going on underneath. This whole time you're also going to keep darkening and darkening those layers with your dark sepia and your dark indigo. So here I felt like it needed a bit more dark sepia just to darken it up, as it was kind of getting more lost in the midtones now we started darkening them too. So this is where you're going to start seeing your drawing come to life a bit, because when you're adding in those shadows, it's creating all of that contrast that's really necessary to creating the structure and making the nose look more rounded. These beginning stages are very repetitive, but you're just going to want to darken and blend and darken and blend using your dark sepia and your Warm Grey 5 and your dark indigo. So now is time for one of my favourite bits, and it's where we start adding more colour in. So I'm picking up my Polychromos pencil in the shade Violet, and I'm going in there and adding in all of the purple that I see in there that I talked about earlier when you're adding in the hidden colours. Now, if you have a difficult time seeing these colours, you can turn your saturation up or the vibrancy up, and it will kind of give you an idea of where those hidden colours are lying beneath the surface. And then you're taking your Warm Grey 5 again to start building up those mid layers even more and blending in the colour that you've just added into the rest of the drawing that you've added in so far. Then swap back to your dark sepia and keep on adding this in the dark areas. Now the reason why we do this gradually is because when we're darkening the mid layers, they start to blend in more to the really dark layers, and we need those dark areas to have the most depth. So we need to keep on going back to them with our dark sepia, and also if they've got a bluish tint with the dark indigo, and keep on going back to them, just darkening them so that they're not getting lost in all of those mid-tones. So now you've darkened them a decent amount with those two colours, you can also take your black Polychromos coloured pencil and go in just to the very darkest areas, and you're going to want to be really light-handed with this, like I am here, and just get those really dark areas in with it. Another important thing to note about the texture of the nose, especially when you're working from poor quality reference photos, is that you might not be able to see it very well. So in this one you can see a bit of texture, but you can't see too much that's very obvious. That is why you're using the small circles, and even if you've got a high quality reference photo, you will still use those small circles. But those small circles just help to create a texture without anything being way too obvious, as sometimes it's not the best to add too much detail in if you can't see it. On this particular nose, the most highlighted area is the top right of the drawing, but there are some bits at the very, very top that kind of outline the nose that are very dark, so I'm just going in with the dark sepia and darkening those up there, but still making sure that I leave room for the highlighted bit. So now I'm reaching for a different brand of pencil this time, and this is the Caran d'Ache Pablo in the colour Cocoa. I really, really love this colour as it's like a warm grey, but it has even more brown in it, and it's just the perfect colour. As you can see, mine is well used as I use it in lots of my drawings. So I'm just kind of adding to the mid-tones with this colour so that they're not quite as flat and they've got more colour behind them. Now I'm reaching for the Polychromo in the colour Beige Red. It's like a lighter version of the cinnamon. If you don't have it, you can use cinnamon with a lighter pressure, but I'm just going all over the highlighted area. Then I'm going back in with my black to add to the darkest areas. Now, quite a lot of artists are very against using the colour black, but personally I love it and I think you should add it to your drawings. You just need to be careful that you don't just add it straight up and you've got those colours underneath it so the drawing isn't too flat. Then once again, take your dark sepia and just blend this all out. Now also take your dark indigo again and just add that back to the areas that need it, as sometimes its colour can get lost in a lot of the layers and you really want to make sure that you have the blue colour shining through in the areas that it needs to be. And once again, to no one's surprise, I'm reaching back for the black polychromos just to darken up that left nostril. As you can see in the picture, it's very dark as that side of the nose is in a lot of shadow. Next pencil you'll see me reach for is the Derwent Drawing Ivory Black, which is the colour 6700, and it's a very, very dark black pencil. The pigment is quite soft, so it goes on the paper really easily, and I really love this if I feel like I'm not getting enough black on the paper with my polychromos. Then back in again with the Pablo Cocoa. Now the thing I love about the Pablo's pencils is they're like velvety on the paper. The polychromos are quite hard, so they're good for fine detail, but the Pablos are really good at blending because they're a very velvety pencil. Now the new colour for this nose is the light magenta from the Polychromos range, and this colour I'm just using, it's quite a purpley pinky colour, and as you can see in the centre of the nose, on the reference picture, it goes very, very pink in that area, so I'm just adding that there to emphasise that. We're just under halfway of finishing this nose, and I know it seems like it's been a long time already, but trust me, slow is the process. With coloured pencils, slow layers, everything like that is very, very important to achieving a realistic finish. Now what you can see me doing here now is I've taken the Cold Grey 2 Polychromo and I'm going into the highlights because the highlights aren't bright white on this nose drawing, and some of them they will be, but in this particular one it's not, so I've just gone in there with the Cold Grey 2 just to try and darken up those a little bit, but we're not darkening them up too much just yet. Hand's kind of blocking what I'm doing here, but what I'm doing is I'm taking the dark sepia under the left nostril because it kind of blends into the rest of the side of the nose. So I'm taking that and blending that out and then adding the dark sepia to any other areas that need further darkening. And you're just going to want to spend a lot of time doing this as the eyes and the nose are what really makes a piece. So these are the two areas you want to focus on the most as they capture the character of the animal. Another thing to be wary of is the nose looking wider than it actually is. So on the reference picture you can see there's more dark around the outsides that I haven't added in yet, but you can kind of see my sketchy lines, and that's because this area is actually fur surrounding the nose and you don't want to be doing this in the nose texture. Next we're just taking the black polychromos again and we're just darkening the bottom of the nose as that is where most of the shadows lie. I'm just really taking my time here to study the reference photo and just add all of the darks really dark and the mid layers and blending them out with the dark sepia and the cocoa. It's also really important not to lose hope at this stage in the drawing, as we are still quite in the ugly stages and it'll be a little bit before we come out of them, but don't worry. Like I said before, on this nose, the light is hitting from the right side, so the left side of the nose is a lot darker, so I'm just darkening that a lot with the cocoa and also the warm grey 5. But if you're using a different reference photo, pay attention where the light is hitting from because the opposite side is going to be the shadowed area. Then take the black again and just go around all of the areas that have the highlights. This makes the highlights really, really precise, which in some areas you really need. Then again, still a polychromo, as I literally love these pencils, but I'm going to go and grab my Cold Grey 3, which is in this pencil extender. As you can tell, I use this colour a lot. But we're just going to take that into the highlights, as on this nose the highlights aren't very bright, so we're just going to darken them up a bit. So whilst I'm darkening the nostrils on this drawing with the black, I'm just going to talk to you about something which is now becoming more obvious in the drawing. So you have the ridge in the middle and the one side of it is quite highlighted, and this is the case on most drawings. However, I am going to dim down this highlight quite a bit later on, as it's not really this bright. But just pay attention to this area, and as in most of your drawings, one side of it will have a ridge down it. And when I first started drawing, I completely missed this and it made my drawings look less real. Then I'm darkening the very edge of the nose with the Warm Grey 5 once again. And then after I've done this, I'm going to be reaching for my cinnamon again, as the area needs a bit more pink. So we're just going to go over and layer that a bit more. I'm also just reaching for the walnut brown as well. Again, one of my most used colours. In this nose with the lighting, there's not too much brown, which is really obvious, but there is a bit, so I thought I'd incorporate that a bit with the walnut brown. Now we're getting to a stage where we're really going to darken those nostrils. These nostrils in particular have some strange highlights in them, so we're just going to make sure to leave those out just a bit. However, in quite a lot of nostrils in other drawings, you won't find these, so you won't have to worry about them too much. Though in quite a lot of them, there will be like a pink tinge to them. And if that is the case, you're just going to want to add the base layer of the cinnamon to the nostrils. But in this drawing, there wasn't any need to. But I thought I'd mention that, as it is quite prevalent in my other drawing I'm currently working on, which is a red fox lab. Grab your Warm Grey 5s again, because it's that time. So we're going to go in and darken some of the mid-tones and some of the highlighted areas, and also that left side of the nose, which is really in the shadows, and this is a brilliant colour for that. Another technique which I love for creating nose texture is making a fine point on my kneadable eraser, and I'll use this to make little highlighted spots in the nose, and this can be really helpful because the nose have quite a circular texture and those circles have highlights in them, and this is really useful to create those. Take your black again with a slightly harder pressure, but not too much. You still want to be relatively light. And we're just going to take this over a lot of places on the nose, because this nose is a very dark one. So a lot of those places really need that shadow as well. After this, to add some of that reddy pinky colour to the lovely transition between the pink and the brown grey, we're going to go in with the Caput Mortem. Absolutely beautiful colour, really, really useful for things like this. And we're just going to go in with our circular motion and use that to blend the two together. And the bit I'm really focusing on darkening now is that bit in the middle of the nose. As you can see, the bottom half of the nose is quite dark, and we've kind of left out that middle bit so far. So I'm just going in with things like the Warm Grey 5, Cold Grey 4 for a bit of coolness in there. I'm just going in and darkening all of that, and I'm also taking the Cold Grey 4 into the highlights to further on what we already did with the Cold Grey 3, just to darken it a bit more. And then we are going to take this colour. This colour is the Sky Blue, again from the Polychromo range, and we're just going to go into a lot of the highlighted areas with this, and also that cool area that's on the top left of the nose. But this colour is really, really good in highlights, as quite often highlights will have quite a blue reflected tinge. And then furthering that with the colour Ultramarine, also by the Polychromos, and that's just going in any areas that need a slightly brighter blue. And then we're going to darken again with the black. Now this here is me realising that the highlight on that left nostril needs to be a lot smaller all of the way around, so that's what I'm using my black for, is I'm just going to go and darken around that area so the highlight isn't as big. And then I'm also taking the dark sepia to help me further do that, make that highlight a lot smaller, a lot less obvious, and so that it fits with the reference photo a lot more. Now, something I did with this drawing is I decided to tone down the colours of the nose. And you may think, why did you do this? That is because in the reference image, the whole thing is leaning slightly red, and that is because the particular dog that I'm drawing has red in its surroundings around it, and this is reflecting onto the nose and fur. And as we aren't drawing this background with the pet, it doesn't really make much sense to include loads of this colour, so I'm only including a bit and I'm balancing out with the other colours I see that it would look like in a more normal, natural lighting. Despite this though, the pink area still isn't looking quite pink enough for my taste, so I am just going to grab the cinnamon again and just take another layer and just blend it into that area again. However, this time, as you can see, I'm taking it slightly into the shadowed area as we need a bit more of a seamless blend between the two areas to help it. Then again, we are doing even more darkening, so we're taking the Polychromo black and also the Derwent drawing black. I really recommend that colour if you haven't got it yet. You definitely should. And we're just going to go in and darken loads of the nostrils, loads of the nose, as I've left it quite light up until now. Now ideally we would have a better reference photo to work from, but often, as I am a commission artist and some of you may be, we do have to tolerate photos that are not so good quality to create works for other people. So this is an example of me making best of the situation and passing on pieces of my advice to try and help you to do that too. Then we're taking the dark indigo again and adding some more of that blue tone in as it keeps getting lost in between the layers. It's really crucial that you do this. We're not quite going in with any new colours just quite yet. We're using the same ones that we already have done, and again, the story is the same, just darkening and darkening that nose is really important. It will provide contrast to the rest of your drawing, and it will just be really, really good to go get all those really dark colours in. So we're just going to spend time doing that, and this also applies to the highlight, just adding more cinnamon to it so that it becomes really dark, as it is quite light compared to the rest of the nose at the moment, and we just want it to be more in proportion. We're also just going to take the cocoa down the side of that nostril where that highlight is, where we're doing the dark indigo and the black at the moment. You see that highlight there? Yeah, we're just going to darken that, because as you can tell on the reference, it's definitely not that bright, but it is still really important that we do have it in there. Even though I am in the midst of darkening, I am going to grab my Tombow Mono eraser in a second, and I'm going to start adding some of those lovely little dots that I spoke to you about. Now you can do this with the kneaded eraser as well, but sometimes if I want to add them in more precisely, I will just grab my Tombow Mono eraser to help me. And I'm going to keep on going with my warm grey 5, dark sepia, all those colours to get the mid-tones and the dark tones really where I want them before I start focusing at the top on the highlight in a bit. And I'm also using the cocoa, the Pablo cocoa for this too. This also is a good time to start getting those highlights where you want them to be too. So I'm just going around them a bit and starting to darken them because they don't need to be so obvious. And I'm also using my cold grey 2, 3, 1 and also warm greys if there are any warmer colours that need to be added. Those are really helpful too for the highlights, but I'm just getting those kind of finished and settled now. And then I'm going to go back in and check all of my proportions to make sure that I haven't added any extra. Now we're going to move over to the right nostril with the strange highlight in it, and we're just going to go and start darkening up, as on the reference photo it is a lot darker than what I currently have, so I'm just adding like cold grey 4 to it just to darken it up a lot, quite similar to what we're doing on the left nostril previously. Also on this reference, the left nostril, the highlight around it, even though that is the side in the shadow, it is a bit lighter, so we're just going to leave it a bit lighter hopefully than the one on the right nostril. Taking the dark sepia again to just go back into those dark points and really get that darkness in there. As you can tell, like I said before, I do love my dark sepia. And then we're going to go clean up any mistakes with the Tombow Mono eraser. Do this as you go along, as it's quite personal to everyone. Sometimes you'll accidentally draw where you're not supposed to. Next is to keep darkening up that middle section with dark sepia and warm grey 5, but be careful not to extend the middle bridge that's really dark. Don't extend that too high up. As you can tell in this reference photo, the nose is on quite a tilt. It's looking downwards and we want to create that, and if we bring that bridge up way too high, then it's not going to create that effect. So we're just kind of doing our simple shading, but we're not bringing the line up too far. Now what you've just seen me do previously is I took the dark sepia all over the highlight of the nose and blended it in to the bottom part a bit more. I didn't want such a stark contrast and it needed to be more blended. And then after that, we're just going to go in and work on that right nostril highlight again. We're also getting to the point where the nose is starting to look more and more finished, and some people would just leave it like this, but we're going to keep going and adding more layers just to get more of that contrast and 3D look in. Also, another really important thing to note is, like I said, we don't have any of the context plotted around the nose at the moment, so it is going to be looking a bit strange. However, you have to remember that when somebody is looking at a drawing, they are not going to be looking that close at it. And when you've got poor quality reference photos like that, it is going to look quite strange when you're very up close, because you're not going to have as much detail in as if you had a better reference photo, if that makes sense. So you've got to remember that people are looking at the whole drawing, they're not just going to be looking at the nose itself. So now we're blending a lot of the highlights in with the rest of it. So we're doing this on the left nostril at the moment. We've literally just done it on the right. If you missed that, scroll back and you can see it. We're just blending the outside colour and also the colour inside the nostril into the highlight to make it more natural and not such a stark contrast, because in this reference it isn't such a stark contrast, it's quite a gradual blend. And you're going to be doing this with cold grey 4, and you're going to be blending the cold grey 4 into the black, and then you're going to come back in with the black, blend the black into the cold grey 4, and then come in with a lighter colour, usually cold grey 2, cold grey 1, just to get those very, very fine light points back in as well. Now what you're seeing is me coming back in with another new pencil, which is the Caran d'Ache Luminance White. And we're just taking this into the very, very lightest areas, and we're just going to add a bit more of a highlight there because I accidentally covered it up a bit too much. I really like this colour, and I also really like the Museum Aquarelle White, which is a slightly stronger version of the Luminance, I'd say, for going back and adding those white over the top. Back in with the Ultramarine Blue, and then swiftly on to a new pencil, Nougat by the Polychromos range, and this is quite a brown nose, so I'm just going and I'm putting it all over the pink area because I think it needs a bit more brown to blend it back out, and it's really good especially in that blend between the pink and the grey brown colour. And then as well as going back and adding highlights back in, it's also really important to get the darks really dark, so I'm just adding a bit more of the Ivory Black by Derwent Drawing just to get more contrast in the drawing, and then I'm going to blend that back out with the dark sepia and the Cocoa by the Pablo's range. And here is where we're going to finally darken the highlight next to the bridge and just above the nostrils, just so that the highlights aren't too prominent and we can get those really dark areas in. And then with another layer of cinnamon, just to get more of a pinky feel in that area over there, which is really, really important because it's still looking not quite right. And then we're going to go back in with the violet, just to add the purple tinge back in that was lost a bit during layering. There's a lot of the same colours, I'm just going back in to darken the highlight as I did with the bottom of the nose, which we've now mostly done. And it's just really important that it's not too much of a stark contrast between the top of the nose and the bottom of the nose, but we want it to have enough contrast to the point where the nose is looking rounder and more 3D. And then going in with the Cocoa to blend these areas further. Now, colour pencils is a very slow process, so you just want to make sure you're taking your time and not rushing through it too much. We really don't have long left to go, just a bit more and we'll be finished with this nose. So we're going to take the Cocoa and we're going to darken the top of it. But if you can see, I'm doing tiny little hair strokes. There are very fine hairs at the top of the nose that blend into the normal fur. So I do sometimes like to add these in with the Pablo Cocoa, just to the very top of the nose so it'll blend more. And then we're going to take the dark sepia and create little circles all over the highlighted area, as there are still some darknesses in this area where the nose texture is. So it's really important to capture these. And then we will blend the dark sepia out with the cinnamon before going back in with the black to just create more little texture over the dark areas, as these two also need the darker bits within them to create the nose texture. Taking the Luminance Burnt Sienna 10% in the more pink areas and the Luminance Dark Flesh 5% on those more orangey tan areas. And this will just help me build up more colour. So I'm just touching up the black on that mid bit that goes all the way across the very middle of the nose. And most noses will have this bit, and it usually is one of the darkest areas, so really pay attention to this area and then make sure you're blending it out into the rest of the nose as well. Here I'm using the warm grey 5 to do so. And then I'm just going to go in with my Derwent Drawing Ivory Black again, just to further darken all of the colours. Then after darkening that up a bit, I'm just going to go in with my kneadable eraser and just blot out some highlights that I can then put my luminance of white coloured pencil into to get the more highlighted area of the nose, which on this one is of course the right-handed top side of the nose, and this is really key for adding texture back into the nose. And then I'm just going to go and do my final darkenings with my polychromo black and just make sure everywhere is as dark as I want it to be. And then I'm also going to use my Derwent Drawing black if I need to just make the very, very dark bits as dark as they possibly can be. And then that's when I'm going to go in with my luminance white. However, it's not really showing up after dabbing it in, just to kind of get rid of the excess pigment. So I'm going to go back in with my Museum Aquarelle white, which is slightly stronger. However, because I put so many layers on this page, my paper was not up to the challenge, so I did have to reach for another material, which is a good alternative. However, I don't reach for it too often, as it's not my favourite thing to use. But I did try just using the dark sepia to go around the circles, but I did need to use this other material as well. So I'll show this other material closer to the end, but I'm just going to start with the more subtle highlights, continuing on by blending with my cinnamon and then adding back in with my Museum Aquarelle white. Now the blending is really important in between these layers because they are the subtle highlights that we're trying to get, so we do want to make sure they're not too obvious and they're not just like random splotches on the paper. And I'm also bringing the Museum Aquarelle white slightly into the very darker areas and the transition shades, because we did lose some of the texture there when we were blending with all of the dark colour pencils. So this process continues on for quite a while before I'm happy. So I'm just getting my black and my cocoa, blending some more, adding in the divots in between the little dots, adding more little dots in. Like I said a bajillion times before, colour pencil is a very slow process, and now I'm resorting to using my Tombow Mono Eraser, which is also very good, like I said before, at getting those fine points in, and then I'm going over the same points with my Museum Aquarelle white to try and build it up more. Now here is the time where I go away to look for my trusty, handy-dandy white Posca pen. I believe it's the 0.5 or 0.7mm tip, I'm not entirely sure, but what I like to do, which you'll see me doing, is I like to add very, very fine dots in. They're as small as I can possibly get them, and I'll just add them all over the highlighted area. Then I'll take my finger and tap them in to take away some of the pigment, as we don't want the really, really bright white, we just want the slight pigment left behind. So as you can see on the left hand side, that's worked really, really nicely. Also, when you tap it in with your finger, if you tap again in the slightly darker areas where you don't want such a bright white, it will also give you an even more muted version, as you can see that's happened on the drawing. And then I'm just going in with my Caput Mortuum just to add some of that red colour back that we've lost, and I'll just mess around with that for a bit until I'm happy with the balance of Posca pen to colour pencil, and then I'll just touch it up with my Museum Aquarelle white. The reason I don't like to use my Posca pen too much is because it sometimes can make very big puddles, and it's not ideal when you've just finished your artwork. However, it is handy when you need it. And then I'm just going to go over and add a bit more pink, because I realise my nose isn't quite pink enough, with the colour Coral by Polychromos, before finishing off again with my Posca pen. Final step, which you'll see in a minute, is to go back in with the dark sepia and black and just make sure the dark bits are still really dark, even though I've put Posca pen everywhere. And now you were able to see the result of where I've taken some of that red out, because the surroundings of the pet was red and I wasn't including that in my background. So you can see how my nose is a slightly more toned down version, but it's just more realistic in general. And I'm adding the final black touch-ups right above the nostril. And here's my result on how to draw a dog's nose from a poor reference photo. Thank you for following this tutorial, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you in my future tutorials. If you have any suggestions for future tutorials, please do let me know down below. Thank you. Bye.